Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session, Meat and Potatoes, Genomics and Canada's Economic Recovery. My name is Pari Johnston. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Public Affairs at Genome Canada, and I'm the moderator for today's awesome panel. I'm going to be introducing our panelists in a moment and talk a little bit about our session. But first, let me just say it is terrific to be part of this Canada Science Policy Centre online conference, which officially kicks off next week. I want to say congrats to Mehrdad Hariri and his team for pivoting so well and pulling off this online experience for us all so that we can continue to talk about the important science policy and innovation issues facing Canada. And Genome Canada is very proud to sponsor the conference. I wanted, for those in the audience who don't know us very well, to let you know a little bit about Genome Canada. We're the national not-for-profit organization that's on a mission to catalyze genomic solutions to meet the grand challenges facing Canadians through translational research, industry partnerships, talent development, data optimization, and policy leadership. We believe that genomics, responsibly and equitably applied, can change the world for the better. Next week, we're going to be having a virtual booth at the conference, and I really encourage you all to come see it so you can learn a little bit more about what we and the 6 regional genome centers across the country are doing to mobilize genomic solutions. And we've been doing this for 20 years. It's our 20th anniversary this year. And it's a chance for you to learn at our booth about what impacts we've had for Canadians in healthcare, food security, and a cleaner environment. I also just wanted to give a shout out to 2 great sessions being offered by our partners at Ontario Genomics and Genome BC next week. If you have time, please attend on November 16th at 2:30 p.m. a session that Ontario Genomics is hosting on a Canadian engineering biology roadmap, building our biomanufacturing future. This will be an excellent session with a number of terrific panelists that are part of a pan-Canadian network to make a Canadian biomanufacturing agenda a reality. And then on November 18th, Genome BC will be hosting a session at 2:30 p.m. ET on responding together in real time, collaboration and coordination in the face of public health emergencies. Genome BC was really a pioneer in catalyzing a COVID-19 genomics response in the province and helped bring together a pan-Canadian response led by Genome Canada. And they will be talking at their session about how they help coordinate and collaborate with provincial funders, researchers, industry partners to catalyze the COVID-19 response and what some of the lessons learned have been. So let me move now to our session, Meat and Potatoes, Genomics and Canada's Economic Recovery. I'm really excited about what the next 90 minutes have in store. And I wanted to give a little context for why this session and why now, and then I'll introduce our panelists. So there have been a number of amazing advances in biological sciences, automation, and artificial intelligence that are fueling transformation in agriculture around the world. And we can look around and see that many countries are scaling their research in genomics and agricultural technologies to continue to ensure domestic food security and to drive economic and export growth. The global population is expected to grow by roughly 2 billion by 2050, and more than 820 million people do not have enough to eat. Continuing innovation is therefore vital if we're to feed the world and to do so sustainably. Canada is one of the world's top agricultural exporters, and we have a major opportunity to seize here, but we face some headwinds. The climate crisis and farm production is having a major impact on the sustainability of Canadian agriculture. Raising animals for meat, eggs, and milk generates 14.5% of GHG emissions, according to the FAO. And the COVID crisis that we've been all living through has exposed our food supply chain vulnerabilities, impacting domestic food security and food diversity here in Canada, as we've seen the challenges of bringing fresh fruits and vegetables across the borders from the US. And so what are the opportunities? The Barton Panel on Economic Growth, Canada's own economic sector strategy table on Agri-Food, and a recent report called Farmer 4.0 by RBC have all suggested that Canada could benefit from major investments in ag tech, adoption, capital investments and infrastructure, including rural broadband, and that was a big announcement by our government this week, skills, and a more agile regulatory regime. Genomics and bioinnovations can play a major role here. And our panelists will be talking about some of these opportunities. McKinsey Global Institute put out a report in May about the bioinnovation revolution and talked about the incredible impacts on economic growth should bioinnovations be able to be applied across healthcare, agriculture, and many other sectors. They estimated that the annual economic impact of applications of bioinnovations in agriculture could generate between $0.8 trillion and $1.2 trillion in economic direct impact over the next 20 years. So our terrific panel of Canadian researchers, industry innovators, and federal policymakers are going to try to unpack some of this opportunity and some of the challenges today. We're going to have an online armchair conversation about Canada's genomics-enabled food opportunity and what are some of the top-of-mind policy, regulatory, funding, and consumer issues at play. We're going to have a conversation with each other and with you to talk about Canada's genomics opportunity in agriculture and how to seize it to drive recovery and growth. After our panel's armchair conversation, we'll open up the floor to questions from you for about 30 minutes, starting at 10 to 1 p.m. Eastern. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our panel. I'm going to give their titles only because you would have seen their full bios in the conference program. So first we have Chris Grainger, who's the CEO and co-founder of Harvest Genomics, based in Guelph, Ontario. And Chris also continues to play a very important role at the University of Guelph. Alison Sunstrum, who is the CEO and founder of CNSRV-X, Inc., a Canadian company researching and applying blockchain technology in agriculture. We also have Dr. Kirstin Bett, professor of plant breeding and genetics at the University of Saskatchewan, who runs the largest lentil breeding program in the world. And finally, Javier Garcia-Garza, special advisor in agriculture and climate change in Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. So Chris, starting with you, and then we're going to go to Alison, Kirstin, and Javier, what would you say is Canada's genomics opportunity in agriculture?
Well, thank you, Pari. It is a pleasure to be here today and to be part of this panel in discussing the opportunities for genomics in the agricultural sector. As a recent startup, it is a very exciting time to be in the ag genomics space. The best way I can really say it is that the genomic toolbox has never been as full for agricultural applications as it is right now. Our company looks at 4 areas where we see wonderful opportunities to integrate genomics to play a pivotal role in ag tech innovation. The first would be plant and animal breeding. We now have these high quality reference genomes for nearly all economically important food species. These biological roadmaps now enable breeders to employ new strategies for developing new food products. 2 examples of these strategies would be genomic selection strategies, as well as gene editing methods. Both of these approaches rely on knowing where the genetic variation of interest resides in the genome to more efficiently improve the genetics of plants and animals. Genomics also allows breeders to compare apples to apples, if you will, with what their genetic landscape looks like compared to other gene banks or repositories in the world to help mine for new sources of genetic diversity that can be integrated to help develop more robust and resilient crops. A second area is biosurveillance. Now, DNA-based detection methods for species have been around for a while, but now with well-populated databases, the ability to take an unknown DNA sequence you can produce pretty much anywhere now has instant utility in decision-making. Genomic technologies also help with the speed of that decision-making, not only because we're able to produce the data faster than ever before, but also earlier in the growing season. As an example, because DNA-based identification methods are independent of the life stage of the organism. So with our ability to genotype faster than ever before, integrating genomic DNA or genomic data into crop management or integrative pest management systems is now possible. A third area is big data. Producing genomic data is relatively easy now. The focus has shifted to the big data strategies to handle this data and make meaningful use of it. This gives new focus to areas like computational or systems biology. Researchers can now address questions in new ways, and we are seeing amazing new discoveries in fields like metagenomics and gene networks to better understand the biology of species, including agricultural species. And the final area in which we are very excited about is portable genomics. The technology has quickly become miniaturized to the point where you can go just about anywhere to do genetic testing. With the pandemic, we've seen the concept of point of care really come front and center, which has created demand for portable genetic testing capacity. In our company, we envision a similar model for portable genetic testing in the agricultural sector, where a point of farm or point of greenhouse testing can become a reality and would have immense beneficial outcomes in addressing food production as well as food safety challenges today and for years to come.
Thanks, Chris. That was a great overview of some of the opportunities. And just before we bridge to Alison, I'm just wondering if you can give our audience like what they would see if they saw, say, a farmer in Ontario using one of these point-of-care diagnostic tools. Can you just give an example of what that might be like in the day-to-day life?
Sure. So I think a great example is in crop management systems. So if you have an agronomist out working with a farmer and they see a weird looking weed in that field and they have done a few different herbicide regimens on that, we can then look at target site resistance mechanisms of that weed species and in real time or very quickly help adjust that in-season management practice for that grower. So that would be a real life example at play.
Great. Thanks, Chris. It's something new to me in terms of visualizing what that might mean in the day-to-day life. So I just wanted to help unpack that for others. So Alison, could I move to you now, and maybe you could tell us a little bit more about, your company and your leadership in this space, and then how you would characterize Canada's genomics opportunity in the context of agriculture.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Pari. It's just a distinct privilege to join the conversation today. I am a repeat entrepreneur. In my former company, we developed an automated phenotyping platform for livestock. I have been very privileged to work with exceptional genomic researchers for the past 2 decades with funding from Genome Canada, enabling many of our projects. Today, I'm working with a spin-out from Carnegie Mellon University using machine learning to solve some of the toughest challenges in facing agriculture. I'm also a venture partner at Builders BC, a Silicon Valley venture capital fund investing in agriculture. And we had a good conversation this morning before we started about temperature. And I understand that Ottawa is at least 6 degrees warmer than Silicon Valley. So perhaps we need to move some of our companies upward. I'm also a fellow and founding partner of the Creative Destruction Lab. We're accelerating science-based companies like Kirstin, which are innovative and potentially high-growth businesses, which I believe strongly will be the future of our prosperity in Canada. The pandemic has had a profound effect on agriculture and our economy. And I think that recovery should not be just aimed at recovering our losses, but positioning Canada for success in the global economy. This is a unique time in history. We are sitting at a place where we've suffered immense loss, but the pandemic has advanced our adoption of digital technology. Bioscience combined with physical sensing, cognitive computing, and artificial intelligence are bringing what was once a very wide knowledge gap, including we're now linking genomic, phenomic, and environmental science. Pari, you mentioned the McKinsey study. I think that's one of the most encouraging reports that I have seen. And it really forecasts that 60% of our physical inputs in the global economy could be reimagined by bioscience. And within that, you mentioned the agricultural improvements, but the reality is that we could see about 4 trillion annually over the next 20 years brought about into our economy. Now, this is going to require a moonshot of global proportion, but the countries that are positioned to launch will reap the economic and societal benefits. I strongly believe that to build a prosperous country now and into the next century, we will need to shift from an era of traditional infrastructure into one of intangibles. We need a much stronger digital infrastructure, and we need to also look at next generation intellectual property strategies and data policies. Canada is a trusted nation, and we can lead the development of data trusts, smart cities, automated cyber physical factories, and digital bioagriculture. This shift will enable improved efficiency, sustainability, greater personalization of services, and potentially we will see human-to-machine interfaces, which enables new productivity, healthcare, and unforeseen advancements. I actually think we are in one of the most exciting times that we have seen as a country.
Thanks, Alison. That was really a very important point about the digital agenda that has to be part of any of what we're talking about today. And I just wanted to do a quick follow-up before we bridge to Kirstin. I know that you have been involved in some broader national thinking about what Canada needs in terms of its digital, recovery plan. And I'm wondering what you make of the fact that the government just announced a major rural broadband connectivity. Is that part of what might be part of the solution? We just saw that major announcement yesterday, and then the other part is, can you unpack what a data trust is, just for our listeners, so they can understand a little bit what that might mean?
So the recent announcement, I'm absolutely thrilled by the recent announcement. We are going to be able to connect, or we are going to focus on connecting northern and rural communities, which really is where agriculture lives. And the government has stated that we will see 98% of Canadians linked to high-speed internet by 2026. This is really the starting point of an innovation nation. And I think that this is perhaps our first step in really becoming a nation that can drive digital change. A digital trust, we're very concerned about privacy. We're very concerned about use of data. A digital trust will enable us to exchange data, will enable us to exchange data quickly, and really unpack all of this wonderful insight that we have sitting currently in our own computers. And if we can create that standardized way of exchanging data, allowing data to be shared easily, we will lead the world in establishing new uses from the data that we currently have already collected.
Great. Thanks, Alison. I know we'll have more of a chance as we carry on our conversation to unpack that a little bit more, but just wanted to pick up on that term in particular. So, Kirstin, I'm going to move to you now. You're coming from the perspective of a university researcher, and really will be interested in how you would characterize what you see as Canada's genomics opportunity from where you sit. You're at the University of Saskatchewan, one of the leading institutions across the country when it comes to agricultural innovation. And I must also put in a plug because I'm from Saskatchewan, so I'm a big fan of the U of S. And so maybe I could invite you to share some of your perspectives coming from the university research point of view.
Sure. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share. And this is a slightly different view from the previous two, although I pick up, I wouldn't to echo a lot of what Chris mentioned from the plant breeding end of things. I'll take it a bit further. I think maybe I can use the lentil program at the University of Saskatchewan is known globally for many reasons. One of them is that we've gone from basically zero production in 1970 to being the globally dominant player in the world, and that has been 100% due to innovation. The early adopters took a risk on a crop and it grew, and then the province was willing to invest in the research, which has helped bring us a breeder, and then furthered, we then got money from investments from the growers themselves, and we built this program here on the prairies that basically dominates the world in terms of lentil research. And lentil, not being one of the giant crops in the world, was considered an orphan crop, so not much in the way of genomics was being done globally until we decided, well, if we don't do it, no one's going to do it, and we jumped in with support from the growers, which has been very important. And then following a bit of genome sequencing efforts, we managed to get some Genome Canada funding to further all of this work, and we've taken lentil basically from nobody knowing very much about the genome to now we've got a good idea of not only lentil itself, but the wild relatives, which are an amazing source of genetic variability and important to us. And so really what we see from the genomic standpoint is what it's going to do for us is give us a leg up, because in the intervening time, other countries have looked at Canada and said, hey, we have a similar climate, we're going to grow lentils too, and they're actually closer to our markets. And so we see what's critical going forward is to have that first mover advantage and always being one step ahead of everyone else in terms of development of new varieties. And as far as I'm concerned, genomics is going to be one of the key pillars in that. Other ag innovations like digital phenotyping and looking at food quality and looking at new uses for lentils and other pulse crops is going to be critical going forward for our producers and who are basically our consumers. And then to do this, I think it's very important. Plant breeders are known. As I teach plant breeding, I always say plant breeders have to be the friendliest scientists out there, because we can't do everything. We have our pathology friends, we have our agronomy friends, we have our entomology friends, and so on and so forth. And so what I think plant breeders are very good at is taking innovation from other sources and picking and choosing, and this is critical, to pick and choose the ones that are most appropriate for our programs. And I'll just give you one example. A few years ago, using the genome that we had sequenced, we were able to zoom right in on the gene for a herbicide tolerance that was deemed critical to the program. And so we went from what the breeder was having to grow plots for 2 years, so let's say $80 per sample just to get the information whether it was resistant or not, and we've designed an assay that costs us 80 cents and can be done before you even put the seed in the ground, and as a result you waste no resources on any of the material that is not going to be successful. And so we pick up these innovations and really employ them to increase the efficiency of our breeding programs, and the more efficient we are, the bigger the gains will be for not only Canadian farmers, but others as well.
Terrific. Thanks, Kirstin. And I think that's such an important point with respect to having that sort of interdisciplinary, sort of cross faculty, cross university collaboration when it comes to, as you say, really identifying what innovations could be possible by working with other researchers or other academics within the university. And so that's a terrific example. And I'd like to move now to Javier Garcia-Garza, who is going to, I think, bring another perspective on this issue from the federal policy perspective. And so Javier, maybe you could talk a little bit about, what you're doing now at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, because I know it's a new special role, and what you see is from your vantage point as Canada's genomics opportunity in agriculture and how that's playing out within the department.
Thank you, Pari, and thank you for the organizers to invite Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada to be part of this panel. I would say I'm delighted to see that the Canadian Science and Policy Conference is focusing some of this discussion that over the years, I think there have been really excellent sort of contribution to advancing our thinking in the country, but that they are dedicating some specific areas of agriculture, the thinking of agriculture. And I will also say that in the last few weeks, when we had the opportunity to interact with the other members of the panel, I'm really delighted for this opportunity to, I think for myself, for this I think rich opportunity to learn as well from my colleagues in the panel, because I think every sort of vision that they have provided in the last few minutes really contributes to our thinking of advancing the kinds of things that Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada public service certainly do. Our mandate certainly is related to supporting in general, I would say, the public good science and the science, among other things, in the Department of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, advancing that sort of a public good for the benefit of all Canadians, but in particular to the agriculture sector. And there is, as the examples that Chris and Alison just provided, of how they see the vision, also the tremendous importance of having the private sector. I think advancing those stages where we are actually bringing innovation to the benefit of particularly for the agriculture sector, but in general for Canadians. I think this is really important. As you say, Pari, in my last, I think 3 weeks or so, I switched my roles within the department to be this special advisor on agriculture and climate change. But in my last 15 years, I've been working in 3 different departments where I have been responsible. This is Environment and Climate Change Canada, in Natural Resources Canada, in Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada now. But I had the responsibility to advance work related to genomics. So I had a sort of a breadth of the kinds of things that we do in the federal government in some of those areas. It was more than 20 years ago or so that the federal government started to invest in building capacity for genomics. So we recognize that, and there's an initiative, and I can talk later about this. It is called Genomic R&D Initiative. But the Department of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada started to use genomic techniques, genomic tools, long before, I think, as soon as they actually started to become available to advance things related to improving the sort of crop resiliency towards abiotic factors that were influencing agriculture production, things about crop development, and certainly on breeding. But in the last years, we have been sort of moving to advance pretty much genomics, using genomics in almost every piece of the portfolio of research that agriculture actually is involved in. I will just narrow 3 examples where we are actually seeing opportunities related to, I think, what the question of this panel is. One is related to the use of genomics for better understanding on animal production and the zoonotics. As we see right now, the issue of pandemics and disease in animals, and we'll work closely, certainly, with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency for this component, since we have a mandate that is complementary to theirs on the issue of animal disease. But when we actually look at the issue of use of antimicrobials, the development of antimicrobial resistance is a really critical piece for us that we are investing and that we are working interdepartamentally and with other, also internationally, very strongly to ensure that the knowledge that actually is generated that is in agriculture is complementary to the bigger One Health approach that Canada and many other countries are certainly taking. We have invested in recent times. We, for example, have found important things such as certain bacteria that is found in clinics with humans that actually is not really connected to the animals or the same type of bacteria that we actually find in animals. And this is important for the issue of transmission of those kinds of antimicrobial resistant genes from one population to another. And it's not so much about pointing fingers, but rather making sure that we understand the whole ecosystem, where we take the animal production, the environment, the human, and that we actually find the right solutions at the right places. So that is something really important. A second component really important that we, I think, expose even more with the recent, with the pandemic, was the issue of food, so genomics in the agri-food sector. And there are issues related to the agri-food safety or the food safety, but also on the food security. And I think, Pari, you mentioned something related to that. And as we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, there are issues of concern about trade, and actually it was a movement of food, the movement of people, that where we started to look at how can we ensure that our food continues to be safe, and also that the food that is produced in Canada, and this is a really interesting point as well. So about 75% roughly of what we consume in Canada is produced in Canada. But depending on the commodities, there are certain commodities like in horticulture, where we are big exporters on greenhouse production vegetables, but we are actually big importers for almost everything else. So when we look at that issue of the balance of what can we possibly do to make sure that we expand, I think, our opportunities, and this is again working with industry and academics to make sure that we are looking at the opportunities that for production of food that is nutritious, that is accessible to people, and this also relates to the price of food. So that was a second point that I think is an opportunity for us to be thinking of and looking forward to that, and how the federal government can certainly work with the other in the ecosystem of innovation to make sure that we capitalize on this opportunity. And the third and really important piece for me, and especially my new role on issues related to climate change, is about the genomics and as a tool on understanding the agriculture environment nexus. So a lot of work that we actually do in the department is to make sure that our agroecosystems are productive, are resilient to the issues of climate change. And I think, so Chris mentioned the issue of metagenomics. So within certain projects and one very large, I think, initiative that we currently have working with other departments of the federal government, we are looking at this issue of how we can understand better the impact of agriculture, these environments that are artificial in a sense that are part of the production system, that where we are intervening humans with our production of food, that we are actually understanding how this impact is having on issues of soil health, in issues of the water quality as well, and making sure that we are putting and developing production practices that are actually becoming more I would say, building rather than deteriorating our environments where we are producing food. And so we have projects within Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada that are very targeted to ensuring that we are actually having a good understanding of what is the impact of agriculture production on the environment, but also how we can build resilience. And this is really important in our agroecosystems. So that element of agriculture and the environment, when it comes to biodiversity, soil health, water quality and how we use the water, as well as what impact we have in water, are really important components, as well as the important issue that was mentioned, the greenhouse gas emissions that are coming out of agriculture production that I think you mentioned at the beginning. So I will stop there, but certainly I can expand on some of these comments. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Javier. And before we bridge to the second question I just wanted to give any of the panelists, if you had any thoughts or reactions that you just wanted to pick up based on what you have heard from your colleagues, feel free to just let me know if you want to just make a comment.
Sure, Pari. I'd love to follow up. I'd love to follow up if I could. Yeah. There was something when I hear Kirstin speak, I just get so excited, because Kirstin speaks about being the best in class, world leading plant breeding, but she also speaks directly to growers. And I think that if we're going to commercialize our products, we must be in connection with our farmers. But she also mentioned the reducing cost, or the cost efficiency that she has placed in plant breeding. And that's incredibly exciting. I would also say to Javier, when he speaks about One Health, he's speaking about a very connected world. And I think if we look at healthy soils, healthy plants, healthy animals, we will have healthy humans. And so by really tailoring our food, nutrient-dense food, food that can link to very healthy humans, we're going to reduce the cost of our health care. And finally, it's just so exciting to listen to Chris speak about being at the edge of innovation and commercialization. So what a cool panel you have brought together, Pari. It's just a joy.
Terrific. Well, thanks, Alison. Great follow-up comments, and I really like how you're tying together some of what we heard around the opportunity as it relates both on the science side and the driving cost efficiencies and new knowledge, but also how it's helping build resilience within as a tool to build resilience within our agricultural sector, particularly as it relates to climate change. And also the issue for me that really stood out from what you all said too was the digital and data side of all of this, and that's where I guess I want to move to as we talk about some of the challenges. And Chris, I'm going to start with you because I know you as a startup, you're trying to really you've taken on this risk to start this company coming out of your time at University of Guelph. And you want to make a real go of this as a Canadian company, and I'm wondering if you could unpack a little bit what some of the challenges and what you think is needed to help somebody like you be part of Canada's economic growth strategy for agriculture and really seize all of these opportunities we just talked about.
Sure, absolutely. Do you mean in 2020 or any other year that we've ever had? I think those are two different questions. Yeah. But it's really exciting because some of the challenges and the issues are sort of recently being addressed in terms of rural broadband connectivity, and picking up on Alison's point, unlike let's say human healthcare or medicine that happens in the big urban centers, agriculture is rural. And if we're going to get this technology out to that end user and really work with farmers, then we need to get this capacity for testing to those rural areas where agriculture, by and large is. So, again, as a startup, we would like to see a bit more investment on the deployment of these technologies. Over the last 20 years, there's been wonderful investment in the development of these tools, but really we're at the stage now that deployment is very feasible and should really be put as an emphasis for incorporating different genomic technologies. And the rest of the panel highlighted so many myriad of applications, whether we're talking about agriculture or the environment, because really now we're saying that it's intertwined, and genomics can be that bridge to address agriculture, in whole new ways. I guess the second area that I would see as a key issue is ensuring that the quality of the databases is maintained, or better yet, enhanced. Just picking again up of Alison's comment, telecom is the perfect analogy here. Once you have a cellular network developed, you can communicate from anywhere with a cell phone. Same concept with genomics. Now we can sequence from just about anywhere. And so we need the data systems in place so that our unknown sequencing we do on the ground level can be put into the appropriate context, again, at the field level. A third issue does revolve around the gene editing technology. And I think Javier alluded to this a little bit as well, that even if Canada has a favorable regulatory system for this technology, what does that mean for producers and for companies to get their products into other markets where the regulatory framework can be a bit of a deterrent to using gene editing technologies? So I think that's a very big question for policymakers to address, not only what we do domestically in terms of gene editing policy, but what does that mean on a global scale and those market accesses. And finally, a greater emphasis on domestic and made in Canada solutions to deployment of genomic technologies. Large multinational corporations have immense capacity for utilizing this technology, but what we want to ensure is that Canadian ag companies of any size can have access to this technology in order to maintain their competitiveness, again, at a global scale.
Thanks, Chris. Those are terrific, all 4 points. And I just really wanted to pick up on one point you made in particular. Alison, you mentioned as well the McKinsey Global Institute report on bioinnovations that came out in May. I agree, it's an incredibly foundational report about the opportunities, but it also talks about that if we don't get the policy and regulatory and public trust dimensions right in terms of some of these bioinnovations, up to 70% of them can never see the light of day. And so it really is, we need to take, as Javier talked about, an ecosystem approach to these issues. And I really appreciate you underscoring that, as I've learned more about the space when I joined Genome Canada, understanding that other markets like the European Union or some countries in Asia, which have different regulations when it comes to the product versus the process of how something a new food product is developed, is really critical. And while Canada may have some favorable regulatory approaches, we're stymied when it comes to, say, the European Union. So I really appreciate you highlighting that, Chris. And I'm going to bridge to Alison now. And Alison, I know you've given this a lot of thought, as well as some of the challenges and what you think is really going to be needed to seize the opportunity and get over some of these barriers.
So I think one of the things that you said, Pari, is creating trust, and international collaboration in that trust is incredibly important. I also think we must invest in science, commercial research and development. But moreover, we must commercialize our inventions. And that's why I'm so excited by the linkages to growers. We need go-to-market strategies that incentivizes users to adopt new technology. And we must upskill our business leaders. If we don't understand what artificial intelligence and genomics can bring to our industries, we will not have success. And we also must look at our regulatory environment. It must engender trust and work at the speed of commercial change. It doesn't necessarily operate it that way, in that fashion today. I also think, and maybe I'll take a bit of a opposing view to many, I think that in this bio and digital revolution that we're experiencing, government cannot be the only one that creates or funds change. In Canada, we tend to always look to government first. And as much as we'd like to look to you, Javier, I think that we must also be resolving some of our challenges from the business community. Creative tax incentives such as accelerated depreciation for digital technology adoption is one route. But also we need to enhance our research and development tax incentive credits for Canadian businesses. Canadian businesses must be ready to compete. And I think that's one of the most important factors. And it always encourages me so much when we say we are leaders. We are global leaders in many areas. And we must also upskill our workers. And we must look at automation of our processes. And as businesses, we must also learn how to collaborate. And there's great potential for global public and private partnerships. We can change the way that we trade and finance our products and processes. And if we look to new accelerated methods of financing innovation, I think that we will create a very strong economy. We also need to increase access to capital. And we will attract capital by having very strong universities, applied research programs, and we will also attract capital if we have strong accelerators and business mentorship. So I think we must be always striving to the future by looking at new ways to invest, new ways to capitalize, and new ways to automate.
Thanks, Alison. That's terrific. And it really, I think, reinforces some of what I've been seeing lately from the business community, the Canadian Council of Innovators, the Business Council of Canada, putting out recovery plans that really talk about a modern innovation toolbox for Canada. And thinking about industrial strategy, smart industrial strategy, and how we really think about getting behind where we have leadership potential and assets, and really thinking about them from a modern innovation point of view. Certainly, Genome Canada has very much been putting forward that point of view as well, in terms of creating those ecosystem connections between our excellent public research capacity and our industry partnerships driving to commercialization. And so really appreciate those points. And Alice, Kirstin, maybe bridging to you now. So you're hearing a lot of support from colleagues around the importance of science and research and our strong universities. And so you are at one. What do you think is needed to overcome some of the barriers that you faced as a leading Canadian researcher in this space?
Yeah, I think I'd like to. I was just thinking about that in terms of Alison's comment about not just government funding, and I think that's very critical. And I think one of the reasons the breeding programs, certainly at the University of Saskatchewan and also at Guelph, have been successful is because of the tie-in with the producers as well. And it's not just getting money from them in terms of for funding, but it's also getting support from them for what we do. And I think that's absolutely critical, because they are ultimately they are our source of funding, in that we sell them seed or our varieties or whatever, right? So there's that connection as well that needs to be maintained. And it also means by paying attention to those connections, we're doing we are doing work that we think makes sense, and we're driving in the direction that will help the producers and the Canadian economy. On the other hand, we also have to recognize that plant breeding is it's a long game that we play, and that what you fund today, we won't see until probably 10 years from now. And so we have to be able to convince funding bodies, and that includes the producer groups that we work with, that it's worth investing, in a 10, 20-year horizon, not in a today's problem horizon. Like we should have fixed your problem today 10 years ago, or started on that problem 10 years ago. So what's your problem going to be 10 years from now? That's what we need to be working on now. There's that. The other things some of what Chris said that I want to pick up on, the idea of deploying technology. And I think it's super critical that we have much more connections amongst the basic researchers and the applied researchers, and all the way out to the farm, so that the kind of technology that's being developed is going to actually have a route to deployment out there be it as new varieties in the farm, or new ways of managing your farm through the use of these technologies. If the farmers aren't aware of it, and they don't buy in, then there's really, this technology will sit on the shelf. And I think we have a large problem with that. We always get accused at the universities of never taking it all the way through to the end. And I think that's, where sometimes it involves spinning off a company, which is one approach, and the other is, even within the university, it would be good to be able to have more interconnections. And we've been doing that certainly at the U of S. One of the projects we've got going here that's really cool, I think, is it's the Plant Phenotyping and Imaging Research Center, I think PERC, which has put engineering, computer science, and plant sciences together to work on advancing the use of basically digital ag. But genomics is actually part of that platform as well. And so we're trying to interconnect all of it in order to advance what we're doing. The data, and one last point I want to make is that whole data space. Oh my God, we generate so much data, it's not funny. And that's not just the genomic data. We work, especially when we're working on lentils, or right now we're working on the faba bean genome, which is 13 gigs. And, it breaks most computers trying to assemble that genome. So we have to get creative in who we can partner with in order to access the compute, even just to be able to do some of the genomics work we do. But then the digital imaging is like insane amounts of terabytes and terabytes of data. So what do you do with it, and how do you handle it, and answering these kinds of questions. And then how do you store it, and what do you store? And we can't store everything. So what information are we storing? Those are the sorts of questions that we're struggling with, I think, these days. How to handle all the data. And plant breeders are used to dealing with large amounts of data. I mean, we grow tens of thousands of plots every summer, and we take, notes on all of it. And so we have all this historical data as well that we could easily mine if we knew how to, access the data in an efficient manner. So that's a big area I see going forward.
Well, that's a really important point, and I think that's been a real theme of today's talk. And certainly, this is an area Genome Canada is incredibly interested in, helping catalyze a national conversation and national genomics data strategy with other partners in the ecosystem, our centers, CIHR, the new Digital Research Infrastructure Organization, which is doing a needs assessment, getting exactly at some of the issues you mentioned around storage of this incredible amount of data that's being generated, and how do we maximize value in it? How do we create more interoperability in terms of sharing it? There are many issues, and we're very keen to be part of that national conversation, to really move beyond what's quite a fragmented ecosystem to something that is really driving more data valorization and optimization. Maybe Javier, I'm gonna come to you, and then we're going to open up our questions from our listeners. But what Javier would you like to share in terms of your thoughts around some of the challenges, and I hope you're encouraged that you're hearing your fellow panelists saying it's not all of the federal government to fix, but that it's part of, you're a partner in the ecosystem. But where does your role fit into addressing some of the barriers and others that you may be identified? So over to you.
Thank you, Pari, and thank you for, I think, the comments that I was hearing. Because I think whatever notes I had before, I just threw them out, and I'm just kind of reacting. I mean, some of them were related to I think some of the points my colleagues raised, but I will fully agree, and Alison, and I think if we had an opportunity to continue this conversation, will be really interesting. Because I fully agree that it is not for one single organization actually to find what the solution is for some of these very large, I think, challenges, and I would also say opportunities that we have and that we should be maximizing on in Canada. And so when it comes to the issue of investment, if you are or not familiar with some of the, I would say, programming that the Department of Agriculture has as part of the policy framework, we have certainly been for years working with the private sector, with the industry, not from the point of view of handing money out, but actually of making them and us to be collaborating so for us to incentivize, for us to support, I think, that kind of innovation. But excuse me, but in many of the research and innovation agenda that we actually have is driven by the industry, is driven by what the industry sees an opportunity for actually to do work. And in that environment, that industry partner actually works with academic researchers, with federal scientists as well, in order to advance that kind of innovation. So a lot of that funding is not funding that is just 100% governments are handing money, but it's actually something that is asking for the involvement of the industry that ultimately will be the user of that innovation. We want them to be as part of this in a way, and I will come back to this point of co-development and something we are doing in AEFC in recent years. But that sort of co-development of that innovation is something extremely critical for us to do. And the other point as well about the investment, one thing that is, and I've been in the science and technology community for forever, as a scientist myself, but then as an administrator in science. But one of the key elements, and one thing that I'm very happy that in the last couple of years, Genome Canada and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada actually work in partnership to make sure that we mobilize all of the capacity that exists in Canada, and that it is not academics versus federal scientists that are working sort of in a separate type of environment, but what we are actually mobilizing where the expertise are, given that we have important challenges, a huge country, but a very small community that we actually, when it comes to what we face as the challenges and opportunities for a big country as Canada. So we actually are putting our investments in a way that are complementary between our two organizations to make sure that we have the scientists from universities and the scientists from the federal government working together towards very large type of projects. So we actually have been looking at a strategically making those type of investments, and we have several successes on that and work that we are doing. So the one thing I wanted to mention as well related to data, and then I will come back to this bigger sort of picture of what we are working in Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. But there is no question that data is a big challenge. Quite often that the investments that we are putting into that data element. And so I welcome a lot of what your points, Alison, and I think the challenges that Chris and Kirstin are pointing out. So in the federal government, we also are producing humongous amounts of the data, but the capacity for us to actually make the best use of all of it is actually not necessarily there, and we need to build that. Fully agree with that. And we have initiatives that we have been trying to make use of the information that the government has, and in particular, for instance, we at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada are custodians of the national collections of insects, plant material, germoplasm, etc. We are actually building platforms that will be accessible to the public, to researchers and universities, but beyond, so that we actually have information that is digitized, that is available to people. But that is a huge investment for the capacity, the IT capacity that is the infrastructure that is necessary. So my last point. So about 2 years, 3 years ago, actually, we initiated that back in 2017, I think, as a result of different discussions internally, and we came up with a concept that now we have launched into a bigger initiative in the department that is called Living Laboratories. This Living Laboratory, it was meant for us, and continues to be, a tool or an approach, a model of innovation that actually we are using in order to build resilience in the agroecosystems for climate change. But the key element, and the reason why I wanted to mention it here, is because of the approach and the model that we are using is that we are working not from the point of view of, and Kirstin talked about that, it's not the scientists of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada or Environment Canada or NRCan or some of the academics that actually we are working with, that we are not necessarily the drivers of that innovation. We are co-developing the solutions with the farmers, are the key drivers of that. They are the ones who say, I want to use this, I want to, whether it's cover crops, whether it is different sort of methodologies for fertilizer users, building carbon in soils, whatever the situation it may be, it is the grower and the grower associations and the groups of the users of that science who are the driver's seat. It is not our scientists who are in the traditional model, as quite often the scientific community, whether governments or academic, we work sort of in our sort of a bubble, and then when we have kind of a product, then we actually try to transfer that to the user. Well, in this case, actually, they are the ones who are triggering what it is exactly what they want, and then we are accompanying them to actually make that innovation be the innovation that is coming out of that collaboration with them. So the grower, you said that they are at the center of these actual innovation models. And we are now with 4 of those living laboratories and working closely with the United States because of the geography, but also with many Europeans as they are actually advancing the same concept that we, Canada, took the leadership within the G20 countries about 3 years ago, so that we are actually advancing these living laboratories across, at least in this context, within the G20. I'll stop there.
Terrific. Thanks, Javier. Such I would say consensus from your remarks as a panel regarding this core need for deployment, but the deployment can only happen if you're working hand in hand with those who are the ultimate end users. That came across from all of you, and I really agree with that. That's certainly the perspective that drives the translational research mandate of Genome Canada, and it just seems to be such a common theme. So I have checked our question box. We do have some questions from our listeners, but before we bridge to that, is there any follow-up based on what you've heard from your fellow panelists that you just wanted to make before we go to the couple of questions that we have? Anybody wanted to just follow up quickly?
Yes, but if you allow me, because Chris actually mentioned something, he said, as Javier mentioned, but actually it was mentioned in a conversation prior to I think in the panel regarding the issue of regulatory. Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada is not the regulatory agency responsible for that. But I just wanted to reinforce that thought. I think that Chris put on the table the issue that we do have, I think, the tools and technology to do, and you talk specifically about gene editing, but I think we need to be very cognizant about as a big exporting nation that the regulatory systems of other countries where we actually are exporting our products are an important issue for us to work with, to think about, and try to make sure that we do not create barriers for our commodities to be actually exported. So, as I said, and I think you mentioned in your opening remarks, Pari, about sort of refresh of our regulatory system, but again, I'm not an expert on that, nor that my department is responsible, but I think this is a really important issue for us to take into consideration. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Javier. Any other quick hot takes before we move to some of our questions?
Yeah, I have one. I think the other theme along the theme of deployment, it's being very strategic about deploying those technologies that make the most sense to the end user. And as we've clearly defined, the end user is farmers. And Kirstin knows this very well. You could develop a wonderful piece of genetic technology, and if I'm going to go to a breeder and say this is $100 a sample, she's going to say thank you, but no thank you. So part of that conversation has to be, and this really falls in line with the transformational change in the cost of sequencing as well. So now we are getting closer to that, uptake from not only a science point of view, but from a financial point of view as well.
Mm-hmm. Really good point. Really good point. Anyway, we've got a couple questions. So the first one I'm going to throw to the panel, and then the second one, Alison, was directed to you in particular. But the first one, we got a question from somebody asking about how our capabilities in Canada, particularly as it relates to data and artificial intelligence when it comes to agriculture and genomics, compares with other countries. And are there global collaborations that you know of where Canada is involved? But who are some of the lead sort of countries that you're aware of that Canada needs to be partnering with and really stepping up its game to match? Who wants to take that one? Alison.
I'll take it, Pari. First off, I think that Canada is a leader in artificial intelligence. Coming out of the University of Toronto, Amy in Alberta, and across the country, we have examples. I think definitely, as Javier mentioned, we need to be partnering with the United States, Mexico, Europe, and South America. If we look at our trading partners, that's who we need to be collaborating with. I read somewhere that because of the pandemic, we trade with about 90 countries that now have closed borders or limits to entry. If we consider, as borders start to reopen, that we could really push the envelope in terms of those that we communicate with. And I kind of look at it in terms of, if we refer to blockchain, but basically we have a chain of custody. We could also have a chain of knowledge where each university, each partner is exchanging data. But we could also build on that a chain of ownership and IP, and also perhaps a chain of reward. If our farmers are utilizing technology, could we reward them? And could we also consider this overall on an overarching look at sustainability, climate change, and other things? And back to what Chris says, he's absolutely correct. If you don't have a positive return on investment for someone using your technology, then we will not get adoption.
Right. Thanks, Alison. Anybody else want to make a comment about other countries that I mean, I'm familiar with the Netherlands, for example, that's really using a lot of data-driven smart ag. I don't know if there's others, but just anybody else want to comment on that question from our listeners?
I will comment. Not a lot new than what Alison mentioned, but I will say that I will add Montreal, also an important hub where there is a lot of this expertise of artificial intelligence, and I will agree 100% that we have a great opportunity in Canada. We are leaders in that, and and I think it was a bit of serendipity in a way that our biggest research center or our biggest capacity on research related to artificial intelligence, mostly precision agriculture, is actually in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, close to Montreal, and that's the reason why I'm quite aware of that hub, because we have been actually collaborating to try to bring that I think the use of that technology of both from the artificial intelligence machine learning point of view as well, and we actually since establishment of and I think I'm not wrong with this, the establishment of a scientific association of people working in precision ag. It was actually Canadian president of that association for years, one of our scientists in Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, who actually led that community and who have been working on issues of data and data standards, interoperability, all of those kinds of things that are actually critical pieces as part of advancing the precision ag environment. I will agree as well that the collaborations that Alison mentioned, but in particular, we have been working quite closely with the Europeans to advance actually how we can make, I think, the best use of data in order for us to actually improve our productivity, and I will leave it at that. But I think the trading partners, the Americas in general, is an important component. And I know we work in collaboration with Brazil in some elements, so that we better understand, I think, the opportunities as well for Canadian companies that are in that kind of environment to actually see opportunities in other parts of the world.
Thanks, Javier. And I don't know, Kirstin or Chris, if you want to comment. Otherwise, I'll bridge to the second question we got from a listener. Any other comments on the first question? Okay. So Alison, this second question was directed to you. Are data trusts necessary for the innovation ecosystem that you envision for Canada? And this particular issue, they didn't specify whether it was agriculture or not, just are data trusts necessary for the innovation ecosystem you envision for Canada?
I think definitely at the beginning. I think that if we don't have an understanding of, first off, we all consider that we have great value in our data. And that may or may not be entirely true. I actually think that we don't have value in data until we have analyzed it and gleaned insight. But I think at a first step, we must indicate that we will protect data. We will need to do this in a trusted environment. So yes, I believe that a trust is very important. I don't believe that it has to become a intense, bureaucratic, highly regulatory driven, but I think that we do need to have standards that tell us how that data will be collected, how it will be preserved, and how it will be secured. So cybersecurity is a very important facet of it. I think once we get beyond the belief that data will, if we lose our data, we lose our value, I think that's why a trust is so incredibly important. And I think it will push us to the next level, and perhaps we won't need to have the trust factor as greatly as we do today.
Okay, thanks, Alison. Now that question went to Alison, but does anybody else want to comment? Because we've now got a third one, but Chris, it looked like you might want to comment.
Just simply agree exactly what Alison said. I think we're in this infancy with the big data. So it's very important that we launch this to the next levels properly. And I think Alison highlighted that.
Okay, terrific. So we have a question here about business continuity. And in the context of, you know, your particular, say, company or university during pandemics. So it says here, do you think business continuity policies need to be updated as a result of pandemics and other situations in your particular industry? Does anyone want to take that one?
I'll give it a shot. I think Kirstin alluded to this earlier as well, where at universities, yes, they do a wonderful job of, you know, pushing the basic science questions and moving things forward. But universities are also the place to have incubators and research innovation offices, and having that ecosystem for, let's say, researchers that are not professors or faculty to really explore those options, to take that leap and to take that risk to start companies. And so, you know, if there's anything that may need to be updated, is another look at how these incubator ecosystems operate at our universities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Anybody else want to take that one? The other thing I take from this question is around how, you know, given, and we were chatting about it as we were preparing, you know, how COVID disrupted your work. So Alison, you were talking about that there was sort of a 50% ability to keep going in the field in terms of some of your research, but that some of it was disrupted. So I'm wondering if that maybe the question was also getting at, you know, what are our lessons learned from COVID for how we would continue to operate, say at the university or say in your startup context, you know, in a future pandemic.
So anyway, I love the fact, Pari, that Chris responded to this, because he is sitting in the hot seat, really, in terms of being a startup. Mm-hmm. And I was asked once about what made our businesses successful through the pandemic, and I would say it's agility. And I actually said that we're kind of in the phase where all of our businesses are in startup mode. Mm-hmm. And agility really is our superpower. We are always looking for plan B, and got strong digital frameworks for our business has given us that superpower. So if you were able to transition your workers to a remote platform immediately, you were likely a little more successful than those that had to learn how to use a remote platform. Mm-hmm. And so I think even in our universities, we saw the same thing, and Kirstin can probably comment to that. If you were able to get out there, and she made a very good point on her plots and her research plots, and maybe I could ask Kirstin to speak to that.
Well, I guess so this summer what happened, or I guess because this all started in the spring, just as we were getting ready for seeding, we basically were shut down by the university for a short period of time, but then we were able to negotiate with the university to explain how important some of our research was, and therefore we should be allowed, you know, to have some access to campus, and then more importantly to get our plots out in the field. And so we had to develop really very stringent rules, SOPs for how we were going to operate. But because we could demonstrate how we could operate in a safe manner, we were allowed to go ahead at a reduced rate, but we managed to get most of the breeding programs, got most of the material out there this summer. The fall, and the other issue though was, as you plant, this is maybe a different from farming and research in ag is a little bit different than, you know, genomics, which is just runs every day, no problem. But when you've got seasons involved, and what we put in the field in the spring, we hoped we'd be able to get it off in the fall, and not knowing in a pandemic what's going to happen. It was sort of, okay, we'll put it out there, but are we going to get it back out in the fall? And luckily we did, but you know, it was always a touch and go question through the whole summer. And these are issues that we had to juggle all summer, was, well, what do you do? What do you not do? And can we afford to lose everything? I mean, that was one option that we had, you know, one possibility that was on the table in May when we put the seeders in the ground was, we may not get this back.
Yeah. And
that was a risk we had to take, and it worked out, but not for everybody. I think there are places where, you know, that didn't happen. There were some trials lost and so on, but you know, these are things that we had to think about, and the ability to actually argue that what we do is critical because we're so much closer to the farm and therefore closer to the economy, I guess, was why we were able to proceed. Other research endeavors on campus were asked to stay away and just, you know, work from home if at all possible.
Excellent. So I'm just going to note our time. We've got 10 minutes left, and we have two really good questions. So I'm going to ask for some quick responses, and then just for you to all gather your thoughts for one key final message you'd like to leave as we wrap up. So we've got a good question here about working with the end users, and we were talking about farmers in terms of engaging them as users, but this question has come to talk about how do we include farmers in the whole process of research and development of these new technologies in terms of co-creation and co-design. And I think, Javier, you did speak to that in terms of some of your living lab, but that's the first question, which I'll just let you ponder and see who wants to take it. The second was, what's Canada's opportunity in cellular agriculture and using cells to make agricultural products? And I wonder if you have some thoughts there. So who would like to take either of those questions? We'll take about 5 minutes to respond to these two, and then we'll move to final remarks. So
I think for using, you know, the technology at that end user, the portability side is just going to be a tremendous vehicle to interact with that end user. And I don't have one with me, but now that you have a DNA sequencer that can sit in the palm of your hand, or other portable testing devices, you can look at something like Abbott's laboratory, and you know, the amount of equipment that the Canadian government has purchased for that kind of portable testing or on-site testing. I think that's really one way to engage that end user, because seeing is believing. And when you're there working with them and showing them what the technology can, and just as importantly, what cannot do, and I think that's the transparency side of it all. It's very easy for us genomicists to romanticize about the technology, but to really say this is the most impactful technology at the level. And maybe one other quick comment, an interesting aspect of the pandemic has really been that the general public has a much better understanding about the value of a genetic test. You know, when you talk to even just friends and neighbors, and, you know, what is a COVID test? Well, it's a genetic test. And, you know, how can you use that in so many day-to-day applications? And agriculture is just perfect for continuous uptake of these technologies.
Terrific. Thanks, Chris. Anybody else? Kirstin.
Yeah, I just want to make 2 points. One, as a professor, one of the things that I think is critical along those lines is from the teaching perspective. And, you know, the agricultural producers out there today are way more educated than the average city slicker thinks. And they're smart. The only reason they're still in business is because they're smart. And they are willing to take a risk on technology. And so they, you know, one thing that I think is important that from the university perspective is the ability to incorporate. It's important for us to incorporate all these technologies into our teaching, so that they're aware of what's out there, what's coming down the pipe, what it means, so that they can, decide what technology would fit nicely with their particular operation. Or, a lot of them aren't going into farming, they're actually going into consulting businesses and so on. And so they can help farmers pick the appropriate technology and know what's coming. And the other point I wanted to make was, while it's great to involve the farmers in the technology, it's important to be able to separate what their current problem is from what you can deliver, like the timeline to delivery. And I mentioned that a bit earlier, that, if they want you to solve the current problem, but we need to be helping them think about what the future problems are, because if it's innovation and it's in its infancy, then it's not going to solve today's problem. It's to solve later on problems.
Right. Great point. Doing that foresight work, and Alison, Kirstin, any thoughts just on cellular agriculture? Is this something that the University of Saskatchewan is getting into?
That's way outside my bailiwick.
Okay. All right. Well, let me bridge to Alison and then Javier for any other sort of final thoughts on those questions around end user engagement beyond just users of technology, but the co-design, and cellular agriculture and any of its opportunities, or any other final remark you'd like to make, because we're going to close with you two, and then I'll just wrap up. So, Alison.
Yeah, awesome comment by Chris. I think that we're hearing everyone understand what mRNA is from vaccine adoption. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
The other part is, yes, Kirstin, we have savvy farmers. And so I really appreciated that comment. And finally, I think we're going to be looking at cellular everything. Cellular alternative proteins, alternative materials, alternative energy could all come from biology. So I'm just absolutely enthralled by the conversation that we had today. Thank you, Pari.
Thanks, Alison. Well, it was terrific to have you, and thanks for ending on that note of, and again, if anyone who's listening wants to read that McKinsey report, it really does project out what some of the bio-innovations in the next 40 years, along what Alison said, that it really is cross-cuts all sectors. Javier, final comments on our questions, or any other wrap-up you'd like to make?
Yeah, thank you. I will just touch on the issue of the farmer, and I will completely agree with Kirstin. Extremely savvy, extremely educated group that we work very closely with, and I think so. Just to come back to a little bit on the issue of, when we started to talk about the issues of resilience towards climate change, and we look at the history of how long it took for any kind of beneficial management practices to be adopted, usually the lag time from the time that we do the research to the time that it actually gets adopted is extremely long. Long from the point of view of the impacts that we are seeing on issues of climate change. So I think this living lab methodology approach came as a result of trying to accelerate the adoption of that kind of innovation. So yes, there were, I guess, in the early language I was using, the users, but I think the critical element there is that they are the ones who are, as I mentioned, in the driver's seat. And this issue of co-designing, co-development, and co-research that we are doing in their fields, not in our experimental farms, not in our research institutions, but it is actually in their research. It is they who are actually doing all of that. We believe that because of that methodology, then the adoption of those BNPs will be much faster. And the last point, I think, really important, I think what Kirstin said, because this is exactly when we started to look at this more transdisciplinary approach in our research in Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. And although there's no judgment comment on this, but the reality is that we are the national largest research institution in agriculture in Canada, and we work very closely with our academic colleagues because this is really critical. But it is important that when we look at this research being done in collaboration with the farmers, that it was not the entire portfolio of activities, because there are certain kind of research that we actually do that needs that long term, that needs that sort of foresighting, and it is not necessarily something that it will be applicable tomorrow, but it actually is something that needs to be the building blocks for that sort of end product or service that actually will make it into either commercialization, adoption, whatever the situation is, whatever the innovation we are talking about, is this balancing of the portfolio within the activities that we do in Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, that we have things that are very much is there, use them tomorrow, or let's move to actually adoption of that tomorrow. And there are other things that are just the building blocks, and it's balancing that investment that is critical. Now we'll leave it at that, and I think genomics, as I mentioned at the beginning, is a critical tool for us to actually advance anything that we are doing in our research nowadays. So, thank you.
Well, thanks, Javier. And let me close with a couple of final comments. I want to, on behalf of Genome Canada, thank all who participated today out there who, as part of our session. It was great to see your engagement through the questions, and I hope that you really had some important takeaways from our terrific panel. I want to thank Alison, Sunstrum, Kirstin, Bett, Chris Grainger, and Javier Garcia-Garza for their wonderful animated conversation. They're passionate about these issues and really putting some important issues and thoughts on the table that certainly, from my perspective, is something Genome Canada will continue to very much play an important role in helping advance policy thinking and here in Ottawa. I also want to thank all of us for being here today on what's a very important day. Of course, it's Remembrance Day, and I want to acknowledge that we're all here at this session, but also have our thoughts and thanks to those veterans who've sacrificed for Canada and the world. So an important day for us all to take a part in this, but to take some time to remember. I want to ask you all to complete the evaluation of the session as you leave the session, and please take part in next week's full conference and come visit Genome Canada's booth where our team will be there to answer your questions. Have a great day, and I hope we'll see you again at other conference sessions. Thanks to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.